Well, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. You know, you can't run a program in Washington on Canada without having some snow. So we negotiated with the weatherman and the weatherwoman last night, and they said, you'll get some snow for your Canada program. So we have it. However, with snow in Washington, that also means that half of the city freaks out because the city was not born in Canada. And therefore, those of you who have braved the weather, and more importantly, the traffic, we thank you for joining us this morning. We suspect others will be coming in as well as the traffic begins to clear. But thank you for your time with us. And thank you to those who are joining by webcast. We appreciate very much the time that you're taking as well from around the hemisphere. Certainly we have a large group of folks tuning in from Canada, as well as other parts in the hemisphere, and indeed in Europe and other parts around the world. So thank you very much for joining us this morning. Normally at this point in the program, I would ask everybody to turn off your cell phones and electronic machines. However, this time I'm actually asking you to turn them on. And the reason why is because we are encouraging live tweeting and social media. We don't have a specific hashtag for this program, but if you hashtag Canada, I think everybody in the universe who would be interested in what we're about ready to say will be following this. So feel free to do that as well. Well, this is a program, of course, with the Council of the Americas, and we have a terrific lineup of panelists this morning to talk about Canadian trade policy under the new Trudeau government in anticipation of the visit next week to Washington of the new Prime Minister and his team. I also want to thank our partners for this program, the National Foreign Trade Council, the U.S. Council for International Business, and the Business Council of Canada. It's a pleasure to have the opportunity to share the program with each of these fine three organizations. Well, ladies and gentlemen, as all of you know, the new Canadian Prime Minister will be visiting Washington next week for the equivalent of a state visit hosted by President Obama and meetings with other senior government officials. For those of you who are keeping score, this is actually the first time in almost 20 years for a meeting of this nature to Washington. At one level, this is extraordinary. Canada is the top trade partner of the United States, the top energy supplier to the United States, and shares the longest undefended border with the United States. Nearly $2.4 billion in goods and services traverses the US-Canada border every single day. As one of our speakers this morning has recently written, it is reported that more trade flows back and forth each year across one bridge linking our two nations than all of the annual US exports to Japan. Of course, so much trade and investment naturally brings disputes from time to time, but the dialogue between Washington and Ottawa is robust. When issues arise between us, as they sometimes do, only rarely are they allowed to impact the broader relationship given the significant mutual interests that are at stake. But this critically important bilateral and economic relationship does require tending, which is why the visit next week, in my view, is so timely and so important. It's also timely because under the new government, Canada is reviewing its approaches to many things, including trade and investment. And as these issues evolve, the approach and priorities which Canada decides to take will directly impact our own activities here in the United States. It's very important that we take the opportunity, therefore, to understand these issues with clarity and to the extent possible with some foresight. And we have a terrific panel of speakers this morning to help us do that. From the bilateral relationship and North America to the Trans-Pacific Partnership, trade negotiations with Europe, and expanding trade with Latin America, including the Pacific Alliance, to say nothing of potential FTAs with countries such as China and others, Canada's trade agenda is very full. The question is, where's the agenda headed and what can we expect in the near term from our perch here in Washington? You have the biographic information of each of our speakers available to you when you registered in this morning, so I'm not going to take the time to go through that, but I would encourage you to read that information because we really do have the A-team here in terms of Canada trade policy and bilateral issues. And so, ladies and gentlemen, would you please join me in welcoming to the panel this morning Ambassador Alan Wolff, Eric Miller, and Carlo Dade. So, Ambassador Wolff, let's start with you. You have had many years of experience on these issues, certainly from the Deputy Trade Representative position as well as others. Give us a sense of, as we look ahead to the visit next week, what we might be able to anticipate from the perspective of perhaps deliverables, but more broadly, how these issues are being framed in the bilateral discussions.
Well, it is the most important trading relationship to the United States in terms of volume, certainly. And because it is so smooth, in fact, but for the occasional keystone bump or the cool legislation, the fact of the matter is we don't pay much attention to each other. When you said it's the least undefended, most undefended border in the world, to some extent it may be the most defended because we cooperate with respect to terrorism in a way that is pretty much seamless, and it can become more so. There are some constraints on this meeting. The Trudeau government is very new and has not established all of its trade policy, including the full acceptance of TPP. The Obama administration, the Republicans will tell you, is past due in terms of a time to go. So there's a limit in what one can do in 11 months. And the piece I put in Fortune this last week, Fortune magazine, suggested that one thing that could be established is a high-level dialogue. A question with an outgoing administration is, what can you do to carry something forward into the next administration, and establishing some sort of formal mechanism at the top level, which we have with many countries and we do not have with Canada, could be useful. Of course, if we had had that with the Harper administration, it might have been long periods of silence. But with Mr. Trudeau wanting to build a closer relationship, and with Mr. Obama willing to entertain someone for a state dinner, there's some promise. The fact is, a lot of things are working very well. The regulatory dialogue is working very well. It can be improved. In terms of deliverables, if you look at what, and I'm sitting next to two experts who, which makes me feel a little bit chary of sort of putting my feet into Canadian shoes and saying, oh, what does Canada want out of all of this? If you look at the mandate that's been given to Chrystia Freeland, the new trade minister, it is pretty vague, not all that concrete. There's also the two major trade issues for each country is, in the case of the United States, TPP, getting it through the Congress. It would be lovely if Canada would move first. There's no appearance that Canada would want to do that at all. Canada, the new administration in Canada has to make sure that CETA gets through with the EU, which could easily happen in the summer, since I think all major issues appear to be resolved, including a formula for dealing with investor-state dispute settlement. Not sure that formula would work for the United States, but it might apparently work for Canada and the EU. And then endless amounts of translation on the EU side, with external events easily upsetting both administrations. Namely, the Congress simply doesn't want to act during the Obama administration, not even during the lame duck, always a possibility, with respect to TPP, which sort of causes problems. I don't think that will be the case. I am optimistic that it will go through, but that would be disruptive. And were the British to exit the EU, that might make CETA a rather difficult process going forward for a while. The central fact for Canada is it has to be, I would think, deeply concerned with its domestic growth rate, which is very sluggish. Ours is about twice the growth rate of Canada, which means we're also sluggish, but relatively speaking, we're speeding right ahead. They could do a number of things together. They could decide that they were going to establish, as I say, a high-level commission. They could decide that they would talk to each other about softwood lumber, which is a perennial point of dispute. They could improve agricultural mutual recognition of standards to ease some of the problems across the border, as well as cross-border inspections. So, are there specifics that could happen? I don't think that that Mr. Trudeau, but I can be corrected, comes and buys a bunch of F-35s. So I don't see this as really a shopping trip, nor a list of demands. Mr. Trudeau is very interested in the environment. So is President Obama. And they're likely to say some good things about the amount of clean energy that Canada can and does supply. So there are a list of things that can be handled at a level of generality. And if they were going to be here 3 days with a large team, they could actually do a lot in specific areas that would be quite important. But I doubt if that's the major purpose for this visit. I think this will just help set the tone going forward.
Well, thank you very much. And let's stay with that theme for just a minute and go into Eric from the Canadian perspective then, and looking at it through the other lens of the telescope, periscope, what is the instrument? Anyway, from the other side. Give us a sense of how, perhaps, if you can speak on behalf of Canada, right? Canada is looking at this particular moment. I mean, oftentimes in the United States, we try to say that during sluggish periods of economic growth, trade is actually an engine of growth, but at the same time, during those periods of time, you oftentimes lose public support for trade to the extent that it exists anyway, because people say, well, to the extent there are potential for some job losses, then it's a tough time politically to move that agenda. How does that look from the Canadian perspective, and is this something that you anticipate that the government will be promoting, perhaps not just in the visit, but more broadly?
No, I certainly think that trade will be something that is very, very important for this government. The mandate letters, as many mandate letters that lay out the priorities for what the minister is supposed to do, they're very general, as they necessarily are going to be. Now, in terms of the visit itself, among the things that are on the agenda are border issues. There's been a big push to try to get the Canada-U.S. pre-clearance agreement, which was signed in March 2015, ratified. A very significant and welcome move on the part of a large group, a bipartisan group of senators and representatives earlier this week to introduce legislation on the U.S. side to put that through Congress. Canada needs to move that through Parliament as well, but the U.S. is certainly looking for Canada to make a definite statement or commitment on that. The previous government signed the agreement, and of course, there's the question of does the new government embrace it? I suspect that they probably will, but this visit would serve as a catalyst to putting that forward and to finishing the whole beyond the border agenda. Of course, there's a necessity to think ahead about what you're going to see on the border in the future. One of the things that we've suggested is at the officials level, you need to have a process of work that lays out not just what short-term things can we do through regulatory processes, but frankly, what would we want to put in a package to take to a Congress and to a Parliament in the next administration? Because we've tended to do things that can be done by executive order, and now it's time to say, where do we want this border to be in 10 years, and how do we want to get there? And so this is a way of really laying the foundations of that. Another issue that will be very important is softwood lumber. From 2006, softwood lumber trade was managed on an agreement. That agreement expired in 2015 in October, and it basically says you can't bring a new case for a year. Well, that deadline is in October. And considering that this will be the 5th round of softwood lumber litigation as broadly defined, and as I like to say, if you look at the border between Maine and Canada, its shape was largely determined in a lumber dispute, so we've kind of been doing this for a while. But what I think they should do is appoint envoys to essentially say, let's establish whether there's a basis for a renewed agreement or a long-term agreement. One of the things I see is, frankly, an area of opportunity is President Obama sees, he has less of a political imperative on this file than somebody who was facing re-election. So let's try to see if we can get a more enduring framework on that front. They've already said they want to do clean energy, and we'll see what that looks like. More of the action there is on the provincial level, where you have Ontario, Quebec, and California that are becoming part, and Manitoba will join, of a common cap and trade regime. That takes you to somewhere in the neighborhood of 55 million people in our two countries who are living under a common cap and trade regime. It will be important to see what they do on the federal level. Now, on the trade agreements more broadly, the government this week in Ottawa, they initialed the final legally scrubbed text of CETA. Essentially, they did work out, as Ambassador Wolff alluded to, the investor-state dispute settlement provisions. That will now put the agreement on a glide path for implementation. The Europeans see this as something that they want to do, since TTIP seems to be dragging a little bit and won't be finished in this administration. TPP, the government has said that they want to consult. I think if you think about it from a broad Canadian interest perspective, why do you want to cause a rift with dairy farmers, with auto workers, with others that oppose this agreement, when it is candidly unclear that Congress can pass this? When you look at the political landscape on the Republican side, at least the candidate which is ahead on the delegate count at the moment is not exactly the most pro-trade agreement. On the Democrat side, Secretary Clinton has certainly expressed concerns. When you look at Ohio, you have former USTR Rob Portman in a tough re-election fight who's expressed concerns. Senator Hatch has expressed concerns on certain parts of the agreement. So I think it can happen, but it's going to be a tough fight. And if you're Canada, you sort of say, let the U.S. feel the pain with its constituencies and show that they can get this done before we put it to our constituencies. And if we wake up, I think it would be a tragedy for all of us if we lost TPP. But if you think about nightmare scenarios, Canada still wakes up within the NAFTA framework. It still has secure market access. And so this is something that we should do, but it's not the end of the world. The last thing I'll mention that the new Trudeau government has indicated that they want to make their own is a potential free trade agreement with China, which I imagine would capture a lot of attention in Washington. We can talk a little bit.
Absolutely. No, those are critical issues. Thank you for laying them out so well. And Carlo, as we go to you, we've already brought the conversation to specific products, sectors, disputes. Softwood lumber has come up, as of course it has to, by both of our previous preliminary speakers. Also, regionalism has come up, which sometimes we forget. The west of Canada is not the same as the east, just like it's not in the United States, and you've written about that and you've studied that yourself. But let's pull back just a little bit from the Canadian perspective and give us a sense of where trade fits, just broadly speaking, into the Trudeau government's overall agenda, because we can talk about TPP, we can talk about the China agreement. Thank you for raising that very, very important topic. But is this a priority overall for the government as it struggles with low energy prices and slowing economies and domestic issues and all these things? Or is it something that, yes, when the United States passes TPP, then Canada will say, okay, we need to move forward, and yes, we'll do the deal with Europe, but it's kind of on its own track. Where does it fit in the government's consciousness at this point?
That's a really good question. First, thanks for the invitation.
Thanks for coming
And
from
thanks
Canada.
for the inclusion of the provincial perspective, something that's really, I think, doesn't always translate across the border, just how different the provinces are from states. I like to joke that the provinces are closer to Emirates than to U.S. states, and we're seeing some. But in terms of the overall agenda, I think one of the things that the Trudeau government, or administration, sorry, for Washington, has tried to do and focused on is changing Canada's role in the world, the perception of Canada in the world. So obviously, trade policy is going to be very important in that regard. Interestingly, during the campaign over the summer, Trudeau was the only candidate, I think, I would make an argument, Derek, you can jump in if you think I'm off here, but I really think that Trudeau was the only candidate for leadership or for Prime Minister to focus on foreign affairs. Back in June, he came out with a major speech, a close-fought campaign. Domestic issues are always most important. The international issues really don't play. They don't win you votes. But yet, Trudeau took time to do a major speech on not just foreign policy, but specifically on North America. That was a signal that his government, when they came in, were going to focus more on the North American relationship. And we started to see that. The trade minister, Minister Friedland, is also chair of a cabinet committee on North America. In her mandate letter, which I would actually argue is actually fairly specific, I think the 8th priority out of 9 is to improve the North American relationship, to take the lead in government on North America. So we've seen a focus during the campaign, and we've seen moves since he's been in office to really try to re-energize the North American relationship and to pay more attention to North America and to even put resources on North America. If you look at the mandate letter itself, it's interesting because it gives, I think, a fairly clear direction of where the government's gone. There aren't many new ideas. The agreement with China has been talked about before, closer ties with India. We've had discussions with India about a trade agreement. There are only 1 or 2 new ideas. They're looking to create a single window for investments. So there'll be a very strong focus on investment attraction in Canada. We have an office for investment attraction. The government's really going to ramp it up. But if you look across the broad swath of what they're doing, it's about implementation on the trade front. So yes, we're going to sign CETA, but the government's going to make sure that as opposed to the agreement with Colombia, the agreement with Panama, that they're really going to put efforts into getting the word out in Canada and to having more, especially SMEs, look to take advantage of the agreement. A major frustration on the trade front in Canada, and I deal with provincial trade agencies, the STEPs, Saskatchewan Trade Export Partnerships, the ministries at the provincial level. A major frustration is the lack of uptake and understanding of trade agreements by Canadian companies. So this government has, I think, decided, rather than signing a bunch of agreements, to really focus on the ones that are there. Quality as opposed to quantity. So that's going to be a major focus. The trade window is another one. On softwood lumber, I think we probably should see an agreement next week. There's no reason why the Americans can't come forward with an agreement. The split on softwood lumber, and we have a major paper out of Canada West on the softwood lumber dispute and prospects for going forward. But there's no reason why a Democratic president couldn't sign an agreement with Canada. It's not going to hurt them, I think, in the South. Not hurt them in any way that they're not going to be hurt by other things. And in terms of the changing demographics in the States, during the previous round with the softwood lumber dispute, Canada had a really good ally in the U.S. Construction industry. So you have the growers of trees, the millers, and people who actually use it for home construction. That group, which is now, I think, primarily Latino or half Latino if you look at home construction, that's a dynamic that has political implications for the race coming up. And that's an ally for Canada, I think, in the softwood lumber dispute. And I think that's become more important, and that gives enough cover for the Democrats, a little bump on that side to enable them to look at doing something now on the softwood lumber dispute. So we'd really like to see something on that, and that's important in Western Canada. The constant issues over agriculture are always there. We've settled cool, but we're looking at agricultural inspection fees being raised by the Americans, and that's very troubling for integrated supply chains for food and the amount of agriculture trade that goes back and forth across the border. So we'd like to hopefully see them address that, or at least put that issue to rest during the visit. But yeah, this government is different. They came in with a lot more capacity on foreign policy than did the previous government. And that's a huge, huge difference. The government's got a bigger bench. They have people that are familiar with the foreign files. They have people that are familiar with the trade files. That was not the case with the previous government. So this is a major change. So you're seeing them move a lot quicker, with a lot more confidence, and a lot more capacity. And I think you'll see that during the visit here in Washington.
Thank you very much. 3 outstanding initial comments. Thank you very much to each of you. I think you really framed the issues quite well. Let me dig up some of these additional points, or dig into, I should say. Dig up sounds so morbid, doesn't it? But dig into some of the questions and issues that you've already raised. And come back to you, Mr. Ambassador. You were present literally at the creation of some of the discussions in terms of the U.S.-Canada Free Trade Agreement, which formed the basis of U.S. Trade policy going forward. In some level, it was an experiment because we really hadn't done this with other countries in the past. And we've seen from that, of course, the North America Free Trade Agreement build out from there, and now we're partners together in the TPP. You know, this trade relationship has evolved. And I guess if we ask you to look into the future just a little bit, yes, there are some big disputes. Yes, there are some big visions on both sides of the border, but where is it evolving to? In other words, between the United States and Canada, is this fundamentally always going to be a bilateral trade relationship? Are we evolving into partners in working as negotiating partners in other areas of the world? This brings in the question, should the United States join Canada or vice versa in terms of the agreement with Europe, as opposed to doing 2 separate agreements? How do these questions evolve over time? Give us a little bit of insight into where you might see some of those issues going.
Well, I think it has evolved. The relationship has evolved very substantially. The first negotiation I was ever involved with, I was at Treasury and I was on the U.S.-Canada team, in which we had a series of demands, unilateral naturally, with nothing to offer on our side, of Canada, and for some reason that didn't sell. Sort of a surprise, but that's the way it went. But our first major FTA was with Canada. So we've made a lot of progress since then, a lot of cooperation. We do not appear to coordinate as well as we could with respect to the rest of the world, which is why a high-level dialogue could be not only on bilateral issues, but on multilateral and plurilateral issues as well. We have within TPP a foundation, not a perfect one, but a start towards better rules and additional rules on matters like the digital economy and dealing with state-owned enterprises, a number of new elements that have not been the focus of broad agreements before. So we have really a fundamental basis for agreement. We get into trouble, I think, all too easily going off on our own. There will be things in CETA that may be productive after a bit of a dust-up. When we discover we have less good access to provincial procurement than the Europeans do. Some of our cheese folks may not like the GIs, the geographical indications. So we have a built-in positive agenda to some degree, but not good enough. We have a built-in negative agenda. I don't think it would be lovely if SLA could be resolved ever so quickly. A complex issue. BC Interior might secede along with our Pacific Northwest and not join each other actually, but decide that each government had gone too far. So I don't see an agreement coming out of next week. I think more of a dinner than than an agreement on softwood lumber. The idea of envoys is an interesting one. I don't know if they've gotten that far. The problem is, what I don't know is the degree of coordination within Canada on a common position that would allow the Canadian administration to say, well, we've gotten far enough so we can have an envoy. Maybe. I don't think we're there in the United States. I don't have a direct connection with the U.S. industry. I haven't talked with them, but I suspect that they would want to reserve their rights to see what the market is like at the end of the year and like the cycles on a washing machine, go through Lumber 5 to see what they can get out of it with more leverage. I think they could do some things on tourism with the Canadian dollar where it is. There would be real potential there for increase both in investment and in individual investment in the terms of tourism. There could be something done that would smooth business travel to a greater extent without upsetting our immigration laws, but some of the temporary entry provisions. The big things like government procurement are not things that can be tackled overnight. That's a bigger and broader negotiation. But I think and we do things like the highway bill that get the attention north of the border.
You mean the Buy America provision?
The Buy America provision. Right. So we have a built-in negative agenda of problems, as well as the built-in positive agenda. And the latter, I should say the negative parts, tend to get the press, because what press focuses on is the disputes, despite the strength of the relationship.
Well, that's a perfect segue, Eric, to the next question in terms of North America. You're a real North American expert, or expert on North America. And the ambassadors just talked about a built-in positive agenda, but a built-in negative agenda as well, and that really defines North America in some ways, right? There's great opportunity, but there's some political complications. And if I can, before asking you to give your thoughts in terms of where that relationship might be going, let me step out of the moderator role for just a bit. I generally don't do this to insert my own view into the conversation, but the idea of the envoy, to me, I think is a very interesting one. I worked in the White House with a special envoy for the Western Hemisphere, and in the right circumstances and with the right level of political support, this can be a very important position. My own view is that there should be not an envoy, but an institutionalized position within the National Security Council, a deputy national security advisor for North America. And the reason why is because, and this goes to the question I'm about ready to ask you, Eric, North America is fundamentally, by definition, a domestic issue for all three of our countries. And yet it's being handled by foreign policy agencies who really don't have the discussions or the interaction necessarily with the domestic constituencies that are fundamentally impacted by the decisions we're making at the foreign policy and trade policy level. And so if you have somebody at the senior level political level, at least in the United States, with the ability to talk on the interagency, not just with foreign policy agencies, but also with domestic policy agencies, transportation, labor, environment. It would seem to me that that's not a panacea, certainly, but it would seem to me that that would at least channel some of these issues in a way that could be very effective. And just your comments about the envoy, it got me, to bring up that particular point. But now let me step back into the moderator role, a neutral observer and questioner of our experts, and go to Eric. In terms of North America, you've written about this, you've talked about it, you've engaged on it. From the Trudeau government perspective, and recognizing that in the United States this government is leaving office shortly and it will be replaced by a new government, and depending on who the new US president will be, you've already alluded to this, North America may be seen through a different lens with the incoming government, whoever he or she is. What are your thoughts on that from the perspective of Canadian perspective?
So certainly North America, I mean, this is, a lot of times the debate gets framed as NAFTA, and we keep thinking about North America as NAFTA. I think that's the wrong way to look at it. It is the North American neighborhood. These are our neighbors. This is where our economic flows go. I mean, when you look at the numbers, that 40% of what Mexico exports to the U.S. is U.S. content, compared to 4% for China, that's pretty astounding. It means that supply chains are actually delivering value to the United States. For Canada, it's 25%. And so fundamentally in the future, North America as a unit of Canada, the United States, and Mexico will be competing against the Chinas of the world, the Europes of the world, the Indias of the world. And it's time that we actually stop the narcissism of minor differences and start focusing on building some architecture. Now, when I say that we need to build architecture, it doesn't mean that everything in all circumstances has to be done trilaterally. Canada and Mexico are very different countries, they're very different dynamics at play, and they have very different interests and relations with the United States. That's fine. We lay out in the paper Made in North America, I put some copies outside, it's also on the Business Council of Canada's website. We lay out a series of recommendations of what we can do trilaterally, but we say at the beginning of that essentially we need to think about a model of subsidiarity, which essentially says we do what makes sense at the level where it makes sense. In some cases, like in the Pacific Northwest, through the Pacific Northwest Economic Region, it makes sense for states and provinces to engage. In some cases, it makes sense for there to be bilateral. In some cases, it makes sense for there to be trilateral. Canada need not insert itself in the discussions between Southern California and Baja California. Those have principal interests. But we have to think about this as a unit, and we have to expand our consciousness to think about North America as our home, as our principal economic region, and not so much as competitors. Of course, there are always issues, even within the United States. Philadelphia competes with Las Vegas, which competes with Phoenix for investment. That's always going to be the case. But in the big picture, that's where the relationship is. To pick up on some of the questions that Ambassador Wolff said on architecture. So we think about Europe. One of the hard things about having a North America-Europe agreement would have to do with interests. So you have Canada has negotiated already with Europe. Mexico has an agreement which they're renegotiating with Europe, and the U.S. is doing TTIP. As one former senior Mexican negotiator pointed out to me, they said part of why USTR doesn't want us in the room is because we would agree with Europe on intellectual property. And there'd be other cases like that. So the question is, we've got this North American platform. How do we ensure that we're not disadvantaging ourselves by all having separate agreements? So what I argue is that what we need is what they call in the rules of origin world cross-cumulation. So we essentially allow our rules of origin and our technical rules to talk to each other. So that, because if we keep going down the path that we're going, the United States will not be able to count Canadian and Mexican content in their exports to Europe, but Europe will be able to count from the entire EU region. And that doesn't, to me, make a lot of sense. And so if we're not going to have something like TPP where we're all in it trying to develop plurilateral rules, we at least need to find the ways to make sure that the plumbing connects to each other so we're not all worse off.
It does seem somewhat odd that we're all parties to the agreement with the Asia Pacific, and yet negotiating or have negotiated individual agreements with Europe.
Right.
And just as an intellectual matter, I'm not quite sure how those things work out. And we have a number of representatives of companies here, as well as others. But if you're a corporate leader and you're trying to decide, well, where is this production? How is it accounted for? What's the best benefit here?
Cross-cumulation is clearly a second best solution, but from strictly a national interest perspective, there would be some cases where the U.S. and the EU may agree on stuff where Canada and Mexico would be on the other side. And so you'd have different formulations. So North America as a unit would not on all circumstances agree on everything. So if we're willing to have that plurilateral, that's something that might work. But what makes TPP different is you've got all those mid-sized countries, so it's not just framed strictly in a bilateral context, because you have a large enough group that you can have these shifting coalitions on different issues. Whereas the EU, I don't suspect that Sweden would agree with Mexico on a particular matter against Brussels.
Well, we've entered into the discussion, this being the Council of the Americas, you knew there was going to be a Latin America question here, right? And Carlo's done a lot of thinking about some of these issues. TPP includes Latin America, does it not? It's a region that everybody in Washington thinks of TPP as an Asian agreement, and it is at some level certainly, but, and this is my hobby horse, it is also an agreement for Latin America. I mean, we have 3 parties to the agreement from Latin America: Mexico, Chile, and Peru. Hopefully over time, additional ones like Colombia and some Central American countries, even countries in South America, which wouldn't traditionally be thought of Pacific Rim countries. But certainly, Canada is also a party to this agreement. And the question that I would have, Carlo, for you, and then after we discuss this question, perhaps we can go to the audience for your questions and comments and ideas, would be, from a Canadian perspective, where does the Western Hemisphere fit in? We've talked about North America. We've got a sense of certainly the largest trade relationship is the immediate country to the south. But is there a broader Canadian trade agenda at this early days in terms of the government with the rest of Latin America, with the Pacific Alliance through TPP, maybe something with Brazil, mining, energy? How should we begin to understand those types of issues as they're being discussed in Ottawa?
Actually, that would be a great question for Eric. You just had a paper out on Canada and Latin America. But yeah,
well, he writes papers on every topic, so
Well, let me work my way south.
Sure.
And start with the North American relationship. One of the interesting dynamics in the relationship is that, to some degree, Canada is still wrestling with Mexico. What to do with Mexico? The old guard in Canadian foreign policy still views, to my mind, Mexico as an interloper into the Canada-U.S. relationship. So there still remains a small, and getting smaller as people get older and pass along, group in Canadian foreign policy circles that are still uncomfortable with Mexico and the North American relationship. So that's a dynamic that really, I think, affects thinking in Canada about North America and the North American project. There are worries about being conflated with Mexico. Donald Trump, for all the things he said, is yet to talk about building a border on the wall on the northern border.
So I think Canada wants to build that wall to keep us out, maybe.
Well, guns coming across the borders. You talk to the mayor of Toronto, and he would have something to say about that. So that dynamic in North America has always been problematic for us in Canada. But we're starting to see a change, again, I think with the Trudeau government especially, more of an openness towards Mexico. We've taken great pains. Stéphane Dion, the foreign minister at the foreign ministers meeting in Quebec City for the 3 countries, went to great lengths to say that we're going to end the visa on Mexicans coming to Canada. He said it 3 times in 3 languages. I didn't know that he spoke Spanish until he went there and made the announcement. So that's been a bit of a complication on our end. What do we do about that? The government's taking initial steps to strengthen the relationship with Mexico, and I think that that's promising. If that continues, then I think that other projects in North America will stand more of a chance of advancing. There's interest on the Canadian side in talking about clean energy throughout North America. With the mandate letters to the ministers, clean energy and clean technology was, I think, in each mandate letter. So it's a strong component of the foreign minister, strong component of the trade minister, and so the movement that we've seen in Winnipeg a couple weeks ago with the energy ministers meeting and announcing a tentative agreement on cooperation in clean energy is, I think, another opening for North America. The other one is infrastructure and cross-border infrastructure. North America is the only global trade bloc that does not have a bloc-wide neutral third-party infrastructure bank. And I think when we think about engaging with Europe, which has one, when we think about engaging in the TPP, where the Asians have 2 infrastructure banks, the Chinese just started a 2nd bank for Asia at the beginning of the year, that this is an issue that's starting to seize attention. If we're going to be competitive, if as the integrated supply chains that we have are going to survive the TPP, if they're going to survive TTIP and CETA, we really need to think about enhancing our competitiveness. That's movement of people, and it's also movement of goods. And we're the only trade bloc that doesn't have the ability to facilitate both through a neutral third party that can do intelligence, do financing, and also have intelligence block-wide about the movement of goods. So that's a major issue. In terms of Latin America, we haven't seen much from this government further south than Mexico. The focus is on Asia. We have our own Pacific pivot in Canada, and the focus of this government will be China and will be India in terms of markets. It will also be emerging markets around the Pacific. And for them, I think the Pacific means more Asia than it does this side. So it's still early days, but I'm not too hopeful that we're going to see a re-engagement in the hemisphere. I could be wrong, but looking at, especially on the trade side, and Minister Friedland's mandate letter, it was clear, China, India, emerging markets. Very quickly, on the envoy idea, that's interesting, but one of the factors about North American engagement that often gets missed are the provincial linkages from Canada. So we do have more of a reach into Canada with the presence in both Mexico and Washington of provincial offices and provincial representatives. Quebec is here, Ontario is here, Alberta is here, and in Mexico, Quebec, Ontario, Alberta, each have their own office and their own representatives and their own teams on the ground. Alberta actually has 2 offices in Mexico. So that presence of the provinces here is already something that gives us some of the things that you would get out of an envoy. The ability to reach out into communities and constituencies in Canada directly in terms of the North American relationship. And I think that's something that we could look to build on. Hickenlooper was trying to do that with the summit of governors, gubernadores, and premiers. Wasn't too successful, but I don't think that that means it was a bad idea and it can't be successful in the future.
But the point you're alluding to, I think, is absolutely critical. And again, in Washington anyway, we think of these issues at a federal level, and the day-to-day interaction is happening at the community level, at the state level, at the, in the subsidiarity level. I think it's a really interesting point you were making, Eric. Council of the Americas has done a lot of work on the U.S.-Mexico border, and we see, the border community may be a full community that's separated by an international line that was put there for other reasons, but there is a true community that's actually engaging, and when Mexico City and Washington try to determine the results from afar, sometimes we have some results that really don't satisfy anybody. So the points that you're making, I think, are key, and I thank you for raising those into the conversation. Let's go to each of you. To the extent you may have questions or comments, we'll take a group of 3 in the first round. If the question is for a specific panelist, feel free to so direct it. If it's a general question, we'd be happy to entertain that as well. If you could identify yourself by name and organization, that would be terrific. We'll start with Alex.
Good morning. I'm Alex Valderrama with Chevron. I just want to ask if you could address a little bit further. I think the point of North American integration is very, very key for us in order to compete with the rest of the world. And what you mentioned before, Eric, about the plumbing, I think is really important. But one issue where Canada and the U.S., I think, have different points of view is on ISDS that the ambassador had mentioned before. It's so critical, ISDS, for protecting foreign investment. So what would that issue be? I understand that TTIP is trying to create a new arbitration center where the arbitrators would be selected by the state versus what exists today, which both parties choose one arbitrator and then together choose the third. So is there something, could you just elaborate a little bit more about what the difference is between what North America, Canada is able to agree with Europe and the U.S. still is struggling?
Thank you. Very good. We'll take the second question, to the extent there is one, or we can spend the rest of the session on ISDS, because that is a complicated session. We're going to go We're going to go here and then there. Yep.
Ramon Sarducha with Ford Motor Company. Thank you, everyone. First off, again, Ambassador, welcome your thoughts on CETA. I mean, I think the conclusion of CETA by the end of the year would be a welcome outcome. Mr. Miller, again, sort of same thing as Alex said. Thanks for presenting sort of the importance of sort of a North American approach to rules of origin and accumulation. And on TPP, I mean, it's certainly no secret. Certainly here and with sort of our CEO in Canada and sort of our folks are talking to folks in Ottawa is sort of our disappointment with sort of Canada's position or the terms that they accepted on auto with the agreement. Sort of one, the disparity on the auto tariff phase out vis-a-vis Japan that, with the U.S. right? So the U.S. taking 25, 30 and Canada accepting 5, and sort of us sort of again worrying that they would have sort of at least matched that of the U.S. and sort of extend that. Second would have been, again, sort of the lack of enforceable currency disciplines in the agreement itself. With that, sort of, what's your thought that sort of Canada would be able to, again, and I know sort of within the shadow of sort of what happens here in the U.S., but the Canada would be sort of willing to sort of step up to it and actually sort of address that.
Thank you very much. And question number 3, right here. We got the microphone coming. There we go.
Hi, good morning. Jamie Lambert, currently at the Organization of American States. Nice to see some friends here on the panel as well, but in the interest of full disclosure, also a former Canadian official and ambassador in Western Europe during the negotiation of the CETA process and a number of South American countries during the negotiation of our various agreements there. So I have some personal experience involved in that. Very interested in the comments that you brought forward about the scope to work together collaboratively with the United States, and certainly in the multilateral sense we do, but it's on the regionals where the competing interests tend to come to the fore, and they can come to the fore. I mean, in a number of ways. They can come either deliberately or just as part of the wake of the United States movement. I mean, the U.S. and USTR are big ships, and others are affected by their movement. Sometimes that comes in the form of cross-cut. I remember when we negotiated we're negotiating an agreement with Central America, and then the United States entered into the fray, and the Canadian kind of got pushed to a very secondary consideration. We ended up doing piecemeal agreements with some of the countries in the region. With CETA, it's very interesting because the investor-state dispute settlement, it's not necessarily something that would have been so front and center with European preoccupations were it not for the bogeyman of TTIP and the United States entering the fray. So sometimes these interests cross-cut in unhelpful fashion. I'd just like to follow up on the question on investor-state and ask about these the more populist approach, or perhaps less purist approach of the current government vis-a-vis the previous government. I mean, they did compromise on investor-state. There are a host of other issues, environmental issues, labor issues, human rights issues that have been around the negotiation of these agreements. Any of you, what do you think is the degree to which we're going to be putting wine in the water of our trade policy agreements in the future?
Ambassador, thank you very much. Important questions, all 3 of our questioners. Ambassador Wolff, why don't we start with you, and we can look at the ISDS issue.
Starting with ISDS,
yes.
If it ain't broke, we ought not to fix it. In the lumber agreement, one of the things, I represented the U.S. domestic industry particularly in lumber 4, but starting with lumber 2, not lumber 1, came in with 2, 3, and 4. And I insisted that we have commercial arbitration as opposed to a standing body and NAFTA. And I think it's worked well for both countries. That if you look at the results objectively, the U.S. has brought cases that it has lost, and Canada has had some losses and some wins. The fact of the matter is, these are commercial issues that are very well handled by seasoned commercial arbitrators. If you start having a roster of panelists, we go back to closer to a NAFTA model that has caused a fair amount of upset over time, particularly south of the border, and I think will cause us problems with a number of other countries. And no real problem that we're trying to solve other than a political problem where the Germans in particular got upset. So they had to have a different form of agreement, ISDS. But if you look through ISDS, actually under Chapter 11 cases, which I had occasion to do, it's hard to disagree with the results. Commercial arbitration has in fact worked. There is no single case that one can point it to, especially between the US and Canada, that one would say there's an outrageous result. It's an outlier. I worry about, going to the second question that raised by the gentleman from Ford, I worry about a fractured world that we're creating. I think we had to do TPP because things are so immobilized in Geneva. And it was a way through to come to an understanding among the like-minded. But the like-minded actually have different ideas when they do separate agreements. So could we have coordinated a bit between Canada and the United States in particular with respect to our various bilaterals, in this case particularly CETA, and cause less upset that we're going to have? And I think the answer is yes. I would just mention on two things I want to pick up on very, very briefly, which my co-panelists have raised. One is infrastructure, which we don't, in the United States, we've given up on having any. But perhaps working with Canada.
In 5 years, when the Memorial Bridge no longer exists, we'll
we're
rediscover it.
We're building another bridge, or at least Canada's paying for a lot of it, so that's good from a U.S. point of view. That may be a Trumpian idea. Instead of a wall, they just build bridges.
You are going to pay us back.
Slowly. But infrastructure is one area that it occurs to me that could use a fair amount of work. Supply chain. Can we make North America more competitive? The third element, I would say, which we have not mentioned, which is in the mandate, which goes beyond trade, but it's necessary to actually be competitive in order to take advantage of trade agreements. And Canada clearly on all measures lags in innovation. And a bilateral dialogue on innovation would be a useful, especially with the SMEs having, and the digital economy featuring in TTIP, and in TPP in particular. Can't we think of best practices and things we've done wrong in the United States that we regret and have tried to change? But there are a number of things like BIDOL, the involvement of universities. Canada has phenomenal universities, has a phenomenal legal system that is the envy. It is ranked right up there by all. It has enormous stability with respect to financial system, better than ours, as we found out. But what is missing is the innovation piece. And it's worth having a discussion about that, I think, bilaterally. I don't think that's a trilateral matter. I think we would have enough to talk about because we have a number of institutions that are at a similar level that we could work with to improve both performance north and south of the border.
Yeah, I think those are very insightful comments. I mean, we go all over the hemisphere, and every single country, large, small, Spanish-speaking, Portuguese-speaking, French-speaking. The first word they want to discuss with people, the private sector, public sector, is innovation. And it's interesting, Ambassador, for you to bring that into the Canada-U.S. context as well, which I think is a very relevant discussion, and also the fact that, trade and agreements don't guarantee success. I mean, you have to have competitiveness to take advantage of those benefits, and in fact, that's something we've been trying to develop, those ideas to develop with reference to Central America and some of the other countries in Latin America as well that might have trade agreements with the United States, but in fact, there are other things that have to be done. You can't just have an agreement and then all of a sudden success arrives at your doorstep. I mean, there are other things that have to be done. So thank you for bringing that into the conversation. I think some very important insights there. Eric.
Yeah. So on the, first of all, on the auto piece, and full disclosure, I did work on the Canadian negotiating team that did the GM and Chrysler restructuring. So I have I spent a lot of time in Detroit. I've looked quite closely at the auto supply chains in North America. So at a first level on that, I see what happened in TPP as a perfect example of our failure in North America to coordinate. And so you had and we included it in our Made in North America paper, that when you have these integrated industries and you're doing a plurilateral agreement, you have to talk to each other. The American Automobile Labeling Act of 1992 defines a vehicle not as an American-made car, but as a product of USA/Canada. So if Congress gets the logic of integration, surely people at USTR should, but they didn't. And so what happened was no discussions with Canada and Mexico before Maui, and then you get to Maui where TPP was supposed to be gelled. It's like the plane is coming into land, and the great reveal happened, and there were problems. And so you had to go reset and go do it again. We needed to be having these discussions in advance instead of having a US-Japan bilateral. Because the auto industry is fundamentally integrated, part of why you ended up with the level of rules of origin that you ended up with, part of why you ended up with heterogeneous tariff phase-outs is because there wasn't a coordination of the most integrated industry in North America. And so, and what you see is the consequence of that, is that you have heterogeneous rules, and that's where you end up. And so that's the bed we made, so that's the bed we lie in on that. Similarly, on currency, I know that your CEO has been in Ottawa. There have been major discussions on that. Watching that quite closely. Also watching how the value of the Japanese yen is shifting. And so I don't know that there's any really good answer on that because Treasury and finance ministries around the TPP region have been concerned about this linkage. And so I'm not sure really there's any meaningful solution, but I expect listening to some of the comments from the most triumphant Republican candidate on Super Tuesday, where currency manipulation was explicitly mentioned. I don't think this is the last we've heard of this. On ISDS, fundamentally, my understanding of what's been agreed between Canada and Europe in the revised framework is not especially significant. They talk about, instead of arbitrators, they'll be called judges. The Europeans want a more formal court-type feel. Yes, that will create a different outcome. They also explicitly state the right to regulate. There's been some concerns about how NAFTA cases have evolved. The irony is that the Europeans are the biggest users of bilateral dispute settlement. And so, yeah, you got 300,000 Germans in the street chanting against ISDS, which I don't remember what it is in German, but I'll have to learn it. But fundamentally, I go back to the notion of we've been waiting for CETA to close for so long. We've been scrubbing it now for several years. Somebody said they're surprised there's any paper left because they've been scrubbing it for so long. And in trade negotiations, one has to say, let's not let the best be the enemy of the good. If you get a model which looks different from NAFTA but is functionally similar, that's a reasonably good outcome in my books. Part of why it's different in the U.S. is that the US and the EU have not gotten down to the short strokes. And so this issue will come back, and there will be a different model than what is currently in place in US free trade agreements, because you haven't had that discussion. And there's an evolving political dynamic here. If you had a Democratic president elected, certainly in listening to, I was flying to Colombia during the debate in the Senate on TPA, and so not much to do, so I watched the C-SPAN coverage, and the number of members who got up and ranted about investor-state dispute settlement was not small. And so it's not like there's an overwhelming support here. And so I think we have to find a way to ensure that this concept is fundamentally rooted. But if that means evolving the concept to make it feel more politically palatable, it's better to have 98% of an apple than no apple at all, I would argue.
Very good. Carlo, to you.
So 3 points to the questions that were asked. First, on autos. There's also a regional, Canada West Foundation, yes, I live in the regional debate, but there's a regional element to this too. We don't make cars in Western Canada, but we do produce commodities for which there's a huge and growing demand as the global middle class grows. We have technologies that are also in demand, services that are in demand as these markets grow. So the TPP is also a national balance, interest of different parts of the country, gains and losses for different parts of the country. So if you look for Canada as a whole, the gains that we stand, the long-term gains in industries where demand will grow because of demographics around the globe, because of the rise of the middle class, not just mouths to feed, but rising incomes. This is extremely important for us. Canada is in second to last place in terms of trade agreements signed with Asia on this side of the Pacific Ocean. You look at countries like Chile that have 9 agreements. The Pacific Alliance grants those agreements to the other members too. Up until we signed Korea last year, we had 0 agreements. It was us and Ecuador with no agreements on the other side of the Pacific. So this is hugely important for large swaths of the country, and I would argue that there's a similar dynamic probably at play in the US. On the innovation point, I think the clean energy announcement that was announced in Winnipeg offers some possibilities for cooperation. If we're both funding research, if all 3 countries are funding research together, that increases the ability of Canadians to get patents and also to share in some of the innovation. I think that's an important step for us. We are to some degree a foreign affiliate, a succursale of American companies, and that takes away a lot of innovation. We also don't spend as much as the Americans do. I mean, the R&D budget by the Pentagon, I think, is something like half of what the Ministry of Defense spends in Canada, the entire budget. NIH, the budget that NIH has for medicine is, I think, a factor of 10 times larger than what we spend across Canada at the provincial level, at the federal level. So, we really need to do something about innovation, and signing agreements with the Americans to co-fund and to work together, I think, may offer a path out of that. And last, on investor state. Look, when we meet in rooms like this, and groups of us that understand trade, the policy elites, get together and talk about investor state, these sorts of things make sense. But when I'm out in places like Red Deer or Brandon, Manitoba, talking not just to the NGOs and the labor groups, but I'm talking to business councils and chambers, people don't get investor state. It makes no sense whatsoever. And the way the term's being defined by the opponents of trade agreements who have been out pounding this drum for a while, if you thought there were a few congressmen yelling and screaming before, you're going to see even more in the future. And it's become a problem in Canada for MPs that want to support trade agreements. We have not done a good enough job going out explaining why this is important. The first agreement that was signed in 1940-something with Germany and Bangladesh, actually, the public could kind of understand that. They could see a reason for that. But when you're talking about an investor-state dispute mechanism with Europe, the logic, the thin thread of logic that we had for these dispute mechanisms tends to evaporate. So we can have a discussion here and agree upon ourselves, but when you leave this room, when you leave Washington, when you leave Ottawa and you go out and you try to talk to people about investor state, you run into a problem. It's the biggest issue I have when I talk about the TPP. I can make arguments for autos, I can make arguments for dairy, I can win those arguments. But investor state, that's one that I just can't win when I go out. So I think in terms of support for future agreements, if we're going to have investor state, we are going to have to get out and make the case to the public. We're not going to convince everyone, but we've got to move enough people that I'm not just taking a drubbing from every single person in the room when I go out into some of these smaller towns to try and make the case.
Well, and what you've just alluded to is a very, very important discussion. And you're right, in conversations like this, we don't necessarily get into the politics of trade, which are fundamental and they're overwhelming. And Carlo, I think you're bringing us back to that path, I think is entirely appropriate, because it will shock you to know that we also have politics surrounding trade in the United States as well. So these are some complicated issues. We're getting close to our appointed hour, so perhaps there's one or maybe two. Let's go there, and then in the back for the final questions. And don't forget to identify yourself, please, by name and organization. Although we know who you are, the people on TV do not.
Thank you. Jose Raul Perales, Deputy Director for the Global Alliance on Trade Facilitation. My question is a quick and simple one. I'm going to talk about the seemingly unwanted child of international trade, which is trade facilitation. Canada is one of several countries in the Western Hemisphere that has not ratified the TFA. Much to our surprise, as we talk about building a North American platform and we talk about easing trade between our borders, the United States is the only North American country that has ratified the agreement. Can you please talk a little bit about the environment for ratification of the TFA and what Canada, what the Trudeau administration regards in terms of trade facilitation
And again,
issues?
spell out for the audience, what is TFA?
Trade Facilitation Agreement of the World Trade Organization. It is the first multilateral agreement that the World Trade Organization was able to accomplish since its founding, accomplished in Bali in December of 2013.
Very good. Thank you. And the question in the back.
Good morning, Caitlin Brousseau with eBay. This is also a trade facilitation agreement related question, but to the ambassador's comments on the digital economy and the importance of the digital economy to small businesses. On eBay, we have compelling data to show that both in Canada and the US, it's nearly 100% of our small businesses are exporting, and actually the US and Canada are each other's number one trading partners on our platform. You know, the US, to the trade facilitation question, recently increased its de minimis threshold, and we have quite a bit of research to show that customs clearance processes are a real inhibitor to US businesses selling globally, Canadian businesses selling globally. US increased its de minimis threshold here just a couple weeks ago, effective on the date of the state dinner, to $800, while Canada sits at $20. I'm wondering what the panelists think about opportunity for looking at this threshold in Canada, where this could go under the new government.
Well, very good. I was hoping when the small business and SME agenda came up that eBay was in the room, and indeed you are, so thank you for coming. We have two questions. One is on the de minimis and trade customs regulations at the borders, which can be trade inhibiting, as well as the TFA. So, Ambassador, since you were specifically referenced in these questions, why don't we start with you?
I was asked in an ASEAN forum, you know, what's in TPP for us? And it seems to me that the digital revolution and the digital provisions mean that not only can someone in the middle of the United States or up in Chicoutimi can get online and participate in the global economy like they never could before, that this is vitally, it's a dramatic change. This is an agreement for SMEs, and the SMEs are part of the supply chain, so it matters to everyone in the business world, right up to the largest companies, including with the free flow of data across borders and no forced localization of servers. There's got to be other parts of it, namely, particularly with goods. Goods are moving. It's okay to contract to ship something, but then it has to get to its destination. So you have special provisions which are, I think, welcomed by the express delivery people, and then customs clearance issues with trade facilitation. I think there's optimism in Geneva about getting across the threshold to 108. It's just a slow process. My guess, but I'll leave it to my Canadian colleagues, would be that a new administration comes in and it has said it's going to look at everything and consult with people and then make its decision. But I'd be shocked if Canada somehow decided the TFA is not for us. I think it behooves everyone in business to work hard on the countries that have not yet ratified to move their process forward and to get there. It is heartening that something could be done multilaterally. We're not there yet, but that something could actually come out of Geneva that had the blessing of the WTO itself, as opposed to subunits in the Environmental Goods Agreement and Services Agreement. So I think it will happen. It's slow. It's not well understood in particularly smaller countries. And Canadian business, American business abroad, those who are already in signatory countries have to proselytize to get this thing across the threshold. But I think we'll get there. It's going to be 108 unless somebody else decides to join the WTO. We need 2/3, so I think we get there. And eBay, fortunately, not only has been a pioneer, but actually collects data, which has been very useful to the discussion.
So my sense on the trade facilitation agreement is that absolutely Canada will ratify it. There's, to the extent that people know about it, there's no opposition to it in Canada. I think we sometimes jokingly say in Ottawa that there's two phases to every government. There's the pre-election phase and then the post-election phase. And this agreement kind of came to the fore at the beginning of the pre-election phase. And so now that we've gone through that, there are measures like this that are not controversial, but they haven't been gotten to yet, and they haven't found time on a legislative calendar to put them forward. It will happen. That said, I think it is important for everybody to keep the pressure on and build awareness with the new government about this agreement is out there. It's definitely in Canada's interest. On the de minimis question, I couldn't agree more with the perspective of eBay. So there was some data put out that Canada's de minimis threshold is now 40 times lower than the U.S. De minimis threshold. And this is something, it often gets cast as something that this is only to the benefit of the express carriers and it's only UPS and FedEx that want this. But it is actually a fundamental issue for business, and it's also a waste of time for customs officials. And so to go to an international average, which would take you somewhere in the $200 threshold, would be a good first step. And this is not something that is going to fundamentally hurt retailers. It's going to help entrepreneurs, the innovators that are looking to get inputs into the country. And so I think it will take some work because naturally, if you're a brick and mortar company, you may be concerned that shipments from eBay or Amazon or that are brought in through FedEx are going to hurt your business. But this is actually adding to the economy, and we should be wanting to provide Canadian consumers, Canadian entrepreneurs with a sane level of de minimis. And so I think actually one of the unseen things that we could do to stimulate the economy and move up that growth rate is actually to deal with the de minimis issue.
Yeah, and we face the same issue with Mexico too.
Right.
And I mean, it would be a good place to start for a North American unified rate as well.
Yeah, I have no issue with 800, but when you're starting at 20, you've got to be, I think you've got to say, well, poco a poco, as they say in Mexico. And so I think This is something that will require some work, but the narrative, I think, needs to be more broadly understood that this is not an express carrier issue. This is an innovation issue and an entrepreneurial issue.
Carlo, a final thought to you. Both of these speakers have addressed the questions that were there, so feel free to comment on that, or a final thought that you might have about the overall construct that we've been talking about today.
Oh, thanks. Well, again, thanks for the invitation. I join my co-panelists in thanking you for doing this. In response to the questions that were asked, I can always trust Jose to come up with something that I haven't been following closely, so it was good that Eric was here. But it's interesting, you're right, that hasn't been an issue. On the trade talk circuit, we really haven't had much discussion about the TFA. So I'd say that's
So we
something
need
that's
to
been
invite him to come to Canada to make it an issue.
Yeah, you've
Well,
There's still snow on the ground, though, so you're welcome.
It's still minus 40 in some places, so we'll hold off till the spring when the government's settled down a bit. But on the issue of de minimis and the movement of goods and SMEs, McKinsey just put out a study, I think, last week on the digital economy and how important the movement of data is underlying trade. That's gotten some attention. Especially for thinking about how to get SMEs more involved in exports. The worry from the brick and mortar companies, that cow's already left the barn, that moose is already out in the pasture. So opening it up cross-border really isn't going to do much damage. I mean, that battle's over. So I think there's an opportunity to phrase the issue, and this is the political side again, to phrase the issue as a way to increase SME participation in exports. If you could phrase it that way in Canada, a little piece of work to make the case, some research to back it up, I think that would be really interesting. It would give the trade promotion agencies something to work on with agreements like the TPP, which are about trade and services, which have provisions for express carriers, which have provisions for digital trade and e-commerce. So there's a real window to move in that direction. I think it would be extremely beneficial for especially Canadian SMEs that have trouble going abroad and that are reluctant to go abroad. So that's something that's, I think, really interesting on the public policy front.
This has been a fascinating conversation on a topic that frankly doesn't get enough airtime in Washington, and that's the question of the relationship between the United States and our top trade partner and economic partner, Canada. And I really want to thank each of you for bringing your unique perspectives from a position of expertise, from a position of having worked on these issues over the course of your careers, and some of the creative and innovative thinking you've also brought to the discussions. This is something that Counsel of the Americas, everybody thinks of us as a Latin America organization, but indeed, and we are, but indeed we are a Western Hemisphere organization as well. And so you'll see us focusing continually on Canada as well and North America. I think the one of the many things we can take away from the conversation today, if nothing else, is that these issues are going to be with us for a long time now. And we have a data point coming up next week that will be of crucial importance to understanding where Canada's going on trade, and for those of us in Washington, where the U.S., Canada, and North America trade arrangements are going. So thank you for bringing that expertise. Thank you for clarifying some of those issues. Watch this space for further conversations. And again, please join me in thanking our panelists for their terrific comments this morning.